I need to tell you about a crisis that is unfolding inside the retirement accounts of ordinary Americans right now, and almost nobody in the financial media is connecting the dots. 20% of full-time workers in the United States have taken hardship withdrawals from their 401k accounts in the past 12 months. That is 1 in 5 people, not retirees, not people who lost their jobs, people who are currently employed, earning a paycheck, and still cannot make ends meet without liquidating their future. This is not a recession indicator. This is a solvency indicator. And in 50 years of studying how debt cycles destroy household wealth, I have learned that when a fifth of the working population begins consuming their seed corn, the structural damage to long-term economic stability is already irreversible. Subscribe now, because what I am about to show you is not a prediction about what might happen to retirement security in America. It is a diagnosis of what is already happening, supported by the most recent data from payroll systems, pension administrators, and federal regulatory filings. And the investors who understand that this is not a temporary stress, but a permanent regime change, are repositioning their wealth before the majority realizes the retirement system is fundamentally broken. Here is how we arrived at 20% hardship withdrawal rates. The American retirement system underwent a profound structural transformation over the past 40 years. The defined benefit pension, where companies guaranteed a monthly income for life, has been systematically replaced by the defined contribution 401k, where individuals bear all investment risk, longevity risk, and sequence of returns risk. This shift was sold as empowerment. In reality, it was a transfer of liability from corporate balance sheets to household balance sheets. The system functioned adequately during the 40-year bull market in bonds from 1981 to 2021, when falling interest rates continuously boosted asset prices and allowed workers to compound wealth at historically elevated rates. However, the regime that began in 2022, characterized by sustained inflation, rising interest rates, and multiple equity market corrections, has exposed the fragility of a retirement architecture built entirely on the assumption of perpetual asset price appreciation. Here is the data that confirms the structural break. The average annual contribution rate to 401k accounts has declined from 9.2% in 2024 to 8.9% in 2025. This marks the first systemic reduction in contribution velocity in recent history. Workers are not reducing contributions because they have achieved adequate savings. They are reducing contributions because the cumulative effect of inflation in non-discretionary categories, energy, food, healthcare, housing, has functionally eliminated the disposable income required for long-term capital formation. Simultaneously, nearly 20% of full-time workers have resorted to tapping their retirement accounts via hardship loans. This is the highest percentage on record. The demographic most affected is the $50,000 to $100,000 middle income bracket, the exact cohort that was supposed to be the primary beneficiary of the 401k system. When a fifth of the workforce is using long-term retirement assets to solve short-term liquidity deficits, the system is not functioning. It is collapsing in slow motion. Here is the mechanism that connects household financial stress to the broader macroeconomic environment I have been warning about. The sustained inflation that began in 2021 was not transitory, it was structural. The cumulative price increases in essential goods and services over the past 4 years have exceeded 30% in categories like groceries, gasoline, electricity, and rent. Wage growth, while positive in nominal terms, has not kept pace with the erosion of purchasing power in these non-discretionary expenditures. For a household earning $75,000 annually, the math is brutal. After-tax income is approximately $55,000. If housing costs 30% of that income, $16,500, and food, transportation, healthcare, and utilities consume another 50%, $27,500, the household has $11,000 remaining for discretionary spending, debt service, and retirement contributions. A 10% increase in the cost of non-discretionary categories, which is conservative given recent inflation data, reduces that discretionary buffer to $8,500. If that household is also servicing credit card debt at 22% interest or an auto loan at 7%, the ability to contribute to a 401k evaporates entirely. This is not a failure of individual financial discipline. This is a systemic compression of middle-class balance sheets driven by the deliberate debasement of the currency required to manage the federal government's $38 trillion debt load. The Federal Reserve's monetary policy, which I have analyzed extensively in previous discussions, is explicitly designed to generate inflation sufficient to erode the real value of sovereign debt. The collateral damage of that policy is the destruction of household savings capacity. Here's what happens when 20% of workers begin liquidating 401k assets. First, they incur immediate tax penalties. A hardship withdrawal is treated as ordinary income subject to federal and state income tax, plus a 10% early withdrawal penalty if the individual is under age 59 and a half. A $10,000 withdrawal nets approximately $6,000 to $6,500 after taxes and penalties. The individual has solved a short-term cash flow problem at the cost of destroying 40% of the withdrawn capital. Second, the withdrawn capital is permanently removed from the compounding equation. A 35-year-old worker who withdraws $10,000 from their 401k and fails to replenish it loses not just the $10,000, but the 30 years of compounding that capital would have generated. At a conservative 7% annual return, that $10,000 would have grown to $76,000 by age 65. The actual cost of the withdrawal is not $10,000. It is $76,000 in foregone retirement wealth. Third, the behavior is self-reinforcing. Once a worker accesses retirement funds to manage current expenses, the psychological barrier to future withdrawals is eliminated. Empirical data from retirement plan administrators shows that individuals who take one hardship withdrawal are significantly more likely to take additional withdrawals within the following 12 to 24 months. The 401k transitions from a retirement vehicle to an emergency savings account, and the emergency savings account is perpetually depleted by the structural inflation embedded in the monetary system. The aggregate effect of this dynamic is catastrophic for long-term fiscal stability. The United States does not have a robust public pension safety net comparable to European social democracies. Social Security, the federal retirement program, is itself facing a severe solvency crisis. The Social Security Trust Fund is projected to be depleted by 2034, at which point incoming payroll taxes will cover only 77% of scheduled benefits. When the trust fund is exhausted, benefits will either be cut by 23%, payroll taxes will need to increase dramatically, or the federal government will need to explicitly fund the shortfall through deficit spending. If 20% of the current workforce reaches retirement age with depleted 401k accounts, the fiscal burden on the federal government to prevent mass elderly poverty will be staggering. The alternative, allowing a significant portion of the elderly population to fall below the poverty line, is politically and socially untenable. This creates a future fiscal liability that is not currently reflected in any federal budget projection or debt sustainability analysis. Here is the timeline that concerns me most. The baby boomer generation, the largest cohort in American history, is currently in the late stages of retirement. The trailing edge of this generation will reach full retirement age between 2026 and 2030. This is the exact window where the combination of depleted 401k balances, Social Security Trust Fund exhaustion, and elevated healthcare costs will converge into a fiscal and humanitarian crisis. The data on pension underfunding reinforces this timeline. Corporate and public sector defined benefit pensions, which still cover a minority of workers, are severely underfunded despite benefiting from the nominal equity market highs of recent years. Public sector pensions in particular face existential solvency questions. The state of Maine, for example, is confronting a pension system underfunded by over 30% of the state's entire gross domestic product. To manage this liability, Maine has explored legislation to transfer public sector workers out of state-sponsored pension schemes and into the federal Social Security system. This maneuver effectively socializes the state's past underfunding onto the already strained federal balance sheet, further exacerbating the sovereign debt dynamics I discussed in previous analyses. Corporate pension sponsors facing similar funding deficits have accelerated risk transfer strategies. Many are offering lump sum windows to participants or executing annuity buyouts to offload liabilities to insurance companies and reduce pension benefit guarantee corporation premium costs. However, these strategies are highly sensitive to discount rate assumptions. A mere 1% downward shift in discount rates, which could occur if the Federal Reserve is forced to cut interest rates aggressively in response to an economic slowdown, would massively inflate the present value of future pension liabilities. This would trigger immediate demands for increased corporate or state funding, precisely as the corporate debt maturity wall, which I have analyzed separately, reaches its peak in 2026 and 2027. The institutional response to this crisis has been inadequate. The policy debate has focused almost exclusively on increasing contribution limits for high earners or providing tax credits for retirement savings. These measures are irrelevant for the 20% of workers who are currently liquidating their accounts. A household that cannot afford to contribute 8.9% of income is not helped by raising the annual contribution cap from $23,000 to $30,000. The structural problem is not a lack of tax-advantaged savings vehicles. The structural problem is the erosion of real wages and the systematic transfer of wealth from labor to capital that has characterized the American economy for the past 40 years. Here is what I am observing among sophisticated institutional investors and high net worth individuals. They are not relying on 401k accounts or defined contribution plans as their primary retirement vehicle. They are building diversified portfolios of real assets, businesses with pricing power, productive farmland, energy infrastructure, and gold. These assets generate income streams or appreciate in nominal terms faster than the rate of currency debasement. They are also structuring their wealth in ways that minimize reliance on government promises or corporate pension guarantees. The retail investor, by contrast, is structurally trapped in the 401k system. The tax penalties for early withdrawal discourage repositioning, even when the underlying assets are experiencing severe drawdowns or when the macroeconomic environment suggests a fundamental regime change. The employer match, typically 3 to 6% of salary, creates a powerful incentive to continue contributing despite mounting evidence that the system is broken. This dynamic ensures that retail capital remains locked in equities and bonds even as institutional capital rotates into real assets and alternative structures. Here is the scenario that keeps me awake at night. The 20% hardship withdrawal rate is occurring during a period of relative economic stability. Unemployment is elevated, but not catastrophic. The equity market, driven by artificial intelligence sector euphoria, is at nominal all-time highs. If we experience a genuine recession, a synchronized equity and bond market correction, or a geopolitical shock that disrupts energy markets, the hardship withdrawal rate will not stay at 20%. It will spike to 30, 40, or 50% as households are forced to choose between paying rent and preserving retirement savings. When that occurs, the 401k system will experience a forced liquidation event. Mutual funds and target date funds, which constitute the majority of 401k assets, will face massive redemption requests. To meet those redemptions, fund managers will be forced to sell equities and bonds into a falling market, accelerating the decline. The negative feedback loop between forced selling and price declines will mirror the dynamics of the 2008 financial crisis. But this time, the source of the selling pressure will not be institutional leverage. It will be retail panic. The political response to this crisis will likely involve some form of federal intervention. Proposals will emerge to allow penalty-free hardship withdrawals, to guarantee minimum 401k balances, or to provide direct fiscal transfers to struggling retirees. All of these interventions will require deficit spending, which will add to the already unsustainable federal debt load. The cost of these interventions will be paid through further currency debasement, which will erode the purchasing power of the very benefits being provided. This is the terminal stage of a fiat currency regime where the government must continuously debase the currency to meet nominal obligations, while the real value of those obligations approaches zero. Here's what you need to understand about the difference between nominal wealth and real wealth. Your 401k balance is a nominal number. It is denominated in dollars. If the balance grows from 500,000 to 700,000 over the next decade, but the purchasing power of the dollar declines by 40% due to sustained inflation, your real wealth has not increased. It has decreased. You can buy less with 700,000 inflated dollars than you could have bought with $500,000 at today's purchasing power. The 20% of workers currently taking hardship withdrawals understand this intuitively, even if they cannot articulate it in macroeconomic terms. They are choosing present consumption over future accumulation because they have lost faith in the promise that future dollars will hold value. This is a rational response to a system that has broken its social contract. In 50 years of studying debt cycles and currency regimes, I have observed that the destruction of household savings capacity is always the final stage before a major monetary reset. It happened in Weimar, Germany in the 1920s. It happened in Latin America in the 1980s. It happened in Zimbabwe in the 2000s. The United States is not Zimbabwe. The dollar is not the bolivar. But the mechanics of currency debasement are universal, and the Federal Reserve is currently executing those mechanics in slow motion. Here is what I'm doing with my own capital based on this analysis. I am not relying on tax-deferred retirement accounts as my primary wealth preservation vehicle. I am building positions in assets that cannot be debased by central bank policy. Gold, which has appreciated over 41% in the past year to above $4,500 per ounce, is the most liquid expression of this strategy. Productive real estate that generates inflation-adjusted rental income is another. Equity in businesses with genuine pricing power that can pass cost increases through to customers is a third. I am also maintaining significant short-duration liquidity, not in money market funds that invest in commercial paper, but in treasury bills with maturities of 3 months or less. This liquidity provides the optionality to redeploy capital when the forced liquidation event I described creates opportunities in high-quality assets trading at distressed valuations. For individuals who are structurally locked into the 401k system due to employer matching or tax considerations, the priority must be to maximize contribution to the employer match threshold, capture the free money, and then redirect any additional savings capacity into assets held outside the tax-deferred structure. A Roth IRA, funded with after-tax dollars, provides some protection against future tax rate increases, but it is still denominated in dollars and subject to the same currency debasement risk. The harsh reality is that the 20% hardship withdrawal rate is not an anomaly. It is the new baseline. The structural forces driving this behavior, sustained inflation, stagnant real wages, elevated debt service costs, are not temporary. They are permanent features of a late-stage debt cycle economy. The individuals who recognize this early and reposition their wealth accordingly will preserve purchasing power. The individuals who wait for the financial media to declare a retirement crisis will be repositioning at the worst possible moment after the forced liquidation has already destroyed asset values. Subscribe now because the data I have presented is public. It is reported by payroll administrators, pension funds, and federal agencies. The only question is whether you act on the information before it becomes a mainstream headline. The 20% hardship withdrawal rate is not a warning, it is confirmation that the retirement crisis has already begun. The question is whether your wealth is positioned to survive it.